Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Krisch, and I'm from EFSA. And this is a very bright place, I now realize. And I want to welcome all of you, all the people in the room, but of course also all the people online, to what promises to be a very interesting session on food safety ecosystems in the One Society path of this conference. We all have to get used to this again, because I think we're all very slick online, but maybe a bit rusty when it comes to attending in person, when it comes to keeping time, when it comes to getting together. But this is humanity. This is what we enjoy. This is how we live. This is an ecosystem. I really liked the definition of an ecosystem I saw the other day, where it said anorganic, organic matter, weather, biosphere, forms a bubble of life. And I think that also really describes the session this morning. What we are trying to do here is form a bubble of life in the food safety ecosystem. But before we go down that path with very interactive sessions with audience participation, I have a few housekeeping notes so that we make it as interactive as possible. So, for the people online, you can easily work in the chat. For the people here in the audience, please open the One Conference app, One Conference website and app that you have, and there you can go in with the chat. Because this is also the new hybrid, that in order to be fair to the people online, also the people in the room, please interact with the chat. It might not feel natural, but it's the best way that everybody sees what we are doing and how we interact with each other. Yesterday, we heard from Monique that for something to be accepted by consumers, it needs to be affordable, safe, and fun. And I thought you can also use that for the food safety ecosystem. For it to work, for us to work together, for us not to say, oh, I have to work with this member state authority, oh, I need to work with EFSA, but to say, why would we do this alone? Why would we not engage? Where this becomes really the inherent part of working, it needs to be affordable, trustworthy, safe, and enjoyable. And people will say, but there is a lot of complexity. Yes, nobody denies that. There is complexity, but let's not make it complicatedness. And who better than us, all of us here, all of us online, and all of us who we represent, our colleagues in the organizations that we work for, etc. Who better than us to make sense of that complexity and to work through it? Bernhard yesterday talked about the need to build up energy to get something going. And that made me think of steam engines, because believe it or not, I grew up in a small valley in Austria where there still exists to this day a small steam engine. And you know how in a steam engine you have to build up, and there's this beautiful English phrase, you have to build up a head of steam before you pull the lever, the locomotive gets going, and then it's a lot easier to keep it going, but you have to really build up that head of steam. It's an English phrase meaning you have to build up the energy, that you're active, and that you work together, and that you make something happen. And who better to set a spark to build up that head of steam than our Executive Director, Bernhard Url, whom I now ask to come and join me and set us off to this journey for this morning. Thank you, Bernhard. Good to see you.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning. Thank you very much for what should I do now? Set a spark, but also being careful not to put something on fire with a spark. No? So welcome to all of you here in person, and also of course our online participants. And I think what is very important for today's session is that we can build on a very diverse group of participants. So our ecosystem is rich in diversity, which I think is a very good starting point. And you might remember yesterday we discussed challenges for science and society, and I named and mentioned growing complexity as one of the most significant contributors to these challenges. And what in our work, in our business, is actually fueling complexity? Where does it come from? And it comes from many different doors into our factory. It's new data, new hazards, new science, relentless innovation, evolving societal demands, new policy objectives, just to mention a few. And the thing is with complexity, it cannot be simplified. It's there. It can only be absorbed by systems that provide a requisite variety. So we need to find ways how to absorb, digest, and make sense of this complexity. And this, from my point of view, is one of the more interesting management tasks of the future. How to absorb, digest, and make sense out of complexity. This presents a huge challenge for each individual organization, because the challenge is, how can we be fluid and efficient at the same time? How can we preserve this, I would call it fluid intelligence within an organization to be able to confront the complexity of the outside world, which is a given, it is there. And we have to set our organizations to be able to digest this complexity. And at this point, we often get the answer that we need to become more resilient, which means to be able to swing back to our original state as an organization after a perturbation. This sounds good. However, at today's pace of change, you might find yourself in a completely different environment after having swung back. So the trick seems to be not to swing back, but to use the energy to swing forward to a new state. I find this an interesting concept which Nassim Nicholas Taleb has coined anti-fragility, which is different to resilience, which means to use the energy of the disturbance to move forward to a new state. Which also seems clear to me is that no single organization, not even the biggest ones, are able to master all this complexity alone. So, could an ecosystem approach help? One interesting definition of ecosystems I have found is that they are dynamic communities of diverse actors who capture and create value by collaborating and competing. And I found this very precise, actually. A diverse community of actors who create value together by collaborating and also competing if necessary. And if we go to our European Union food safety ecosystem, we see that it is very rich in competent actors who produce a wealth of high-quality knowledge. However, this knowledge is fragmented. It's not properly linked, and it leads to duplication. It leads to other inefficiencies, hence a lot of value is lost. So if we would agree to share this knowledge, this would be a major achievement. But how can we make it practically happen? How can we connect data, competencies, capabilities in a mutual beneficial way for the entire ecosystem? I assume that we all would agree, intellectually speaking, that there's a lot to gain. So why is it not happening as much as we think it should? What are the rewards? What are the obstacles? And to which extent can we really rely on individual actors' initiatives, on the one hand, and where are more structural and institutional changes needed? And here, this conference that we have this week is meant to be an opportunity to reflect together and to explore options for a possible roadmap for the way forward. And I think that the diversity of you and our colleagues online is sort of a promise, I think, for success, for harvesting smart ideas to increase this integration of the European food safety ecosystem. These sessions, presentations, and panel discussions will provide ideas to consider, and they for sure will also inspire all of us to engage in shaping a truly collaborative ecosystem. Creating value within ecosystems is a core objective of EFSA's Strategy 2027. It's really at our heart. How can we, together with our partners, create more value in our ecosystem? And more value means more public health, means more food safety, more environmental protection. It's something good in itself. But achieving this objective depends on a community endeavor. And therefore, I would like to invite all of us to co-create this journey together with us towards trustful long-term cooperations for mutual value creation. I hope this session can become something like a catalyst for jointly shaping this ecosystem. This would enormously support the transition towards what we said yesterday, a sustainable food system, which I think is one of the greatest challenges of our time. So thank you very much already in advance for your input, and I hope we will have rich harvest in our ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernhard, for setting us off. Thank you. So, we have 3 speakers, very experienced, to give us inspiration this morning before we go into an interactive participation session. And we want to set this off because I keep with the rail analogies, because there's a beautiful phrase in my first language, German, which says, die Weichen stellen für die Zukunft. We set the railway switch. It doesn't work literally in English so well. We set the railway switch for the future. In English, it would be charting the course for the future, but that's less definitive, because Weichen stellen, to set the railway switch, you know, we are now going sustainable. We are now going to a functioning ecosystem in food safety. And that's what we plan to do here. And first up with us is Georg Winkel from the University of Wageningen, where he's a full professor. He's also chair of the Nature and Forest and Nature Conservation Policy Group, University of Freiburg, European Forest Institute, you name it. He's been in there, if I may add. I grew up on a small farm in the Austrian mountains, and I had to work in the forest too. And what I learned there from my father was really about the generational aspect when you look at forests. And that was always impressed me. You don't plant the forest to cut it down in half a year or something like this. You plant the forest to be diverse. At least that's at the time what people had learned, following all the monocultures. To be diverse, to be living, and to be there for generations. With that in mind, Georg, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the nice introduction. Nice to see that there's a lot of expertise on forestry in the room, because I would like to start my talk on managing complexity, evolution, resilience, and human-nature interactions in forests, and what can we learn from there, with 2 disclaimers. The first disclaimer is that I'm actually out of my comfort zone here, because I think I'm the least knowledgeable person on food safety in this room. And secondly, I'm also a bit out of my comfort zone, because in my talk, I cover a lot of research that I'm not working on myself. I look a lot with a social science perspective with my group on forest issues, but here I talk also a lot about ecology and ecosystems. And I hope my colleagues at Wageningen will not kill me after that talk and say, we have to have a serious talk with you, Georg. That being said, in my talk, what I would like to do is I would like to spend about 6 minutes, I hope it's true, it's a bit for disciplining myself, on forest ecosystems. I would like to talk about 4 minutes on human-forest interrelations, and I would like to spend about 2 minutes on what can we learn from that for the aspect of managing complex knowledge ecosystems. I start with the statement that forests can be seen as an evolutionary success story. Let me give you 2 examples. On the left side, there's a picture of the Amazon forest. The Amazon forest has been there more or less since the dinosaurs died out. This is probably not naturally scientifically speaking correct, but in many millions of years, there's a lot of dispute about the evolution of this forest. It has been retreating, depending on changing climate, to a smaller area, then it has been expanding again, but it has been able to cover a big area of Latin America for many, many million years. On the right side, there is the Old Tjecko spruce tree in Sweden. This tree doesn't look as spectacular as the Amazon forest, but it's unbelievably old. It's about nearly 10,000 years old. And what you can see here is perhaps only 200 years old, the tree above the surface, but the root system has been there since the end of the Ice Age, basically since the spruce went back into Sweden, and the tree has ever been recovering again from the root system to create a new visible tree after disturbances. Unbelievable from a human perspective. Having that in mind, there's obviously, forests are obviously very successful in resisting to changes and being resilient and staying there over a long time. And what are the reasons for that? I have 4 factors. First of all, the ability to optimally explore and use natural space and resources. Again, a picture of the Amazon forest, and you see there's a dense canopy cover. Basically, there's green everywhere, and the trees are able to harvesting all the light that's there in the Amazon. And they do this also with a multi-layer system. If you look a bit deeper, up to 60, 80 meter high tree forest in that area. But there are different layers and different plants that interact closely with each other and that optimally exploit the available light. That's why it's very dark if you walk on the bottom of the forest. But also they exploit the nutrients that are there in such a perfect way that a lot of the water that comes out of the forest is totally pure and without like distilled water in the end. Secondly, within such an ecosystem, there are diverse evolutionary strategies, and there's a huge complementarity of the diverse species that have been evolving to that. This is a nice example that probably some of you have seen about co-evolution between an insect and a flower, where the insect has this very long proboscis that allows it to access the nectar, where only very few other species can access the nectar, which is beneficial for both, for the insect, because it has exclusive access to the nice things that are in the flower for it. It has also benefits for the flower, because that insect will likely go to another flower of the same species, which increases the likelihood for fertilization. In the end, in the Amazon forest example, that has been resulting in a situation that there are more than 1,000 tree species in a 1 kilometer square. It's unbelievable, actually. And that you find up to 2.5 million insects in that forest, all created through a long, long history of specialization and evolution, an unbelievable functional complexity. I think I skipped the example. Or perhaps I don't skip it. I still have a lot of time. There's a friendly timer telling me there's still 10 minutes. You don't need to go to the Amazon to see this. 2 examples of trees that every one of us is knowing. Birch tree on the left side, beech tree on the right side. They are perfectly complementary with their survival strategies. The birch tree grows very fast in the beginning, but it doesn't get very old. When it is 60 or 80, it's a bit like a human being. It starts to suffer a bit, and in the end it is dying, likely before it reaches 100 years. At the same time, the seeds are very light. They can be transported with the wind. So if there's a large forest disturbance around Brussels or somewhere, there's birch tree growing first. On the right side, there's the beech tree. The seeds are heavy. The tree grows in the shade. It grows slowly in the beginning, but it continues to grow. And it gets 200, 300, 400 years old. So both trees work together in a forest ecosystem in the sense that first there's the beech, and in the shade, first there's the birch, and in the shade of the birch, the beech can develop. And they are sort of complementing each other and increasing the resilience of the forest to disturbances. That was an important lesson for foresters to learn, because when I was trained in forestry a long time ago, there was still a tendency to remove all the birches in a cut area or in a cut area where a storm was to protect the beech and to avoid the competition. But in the end, they are also very complementary. There's also a huge ability to adapt and respond to shocks in forest systems. This is 2 times the same species, common oak, in the same region, but on 2 very different types of soil. On the left side, you see it on a rocky ground, very small species, Probably they are at the same age as the tree on the right side, but they have been adapting to a very harsh environment where there's often drought in the summer, rocky soil. So for them, it's rational to be small and to not have too much that they need to feed with water in the case of a drought crisis. On the right side, the big tree, the same species, probably similar genetic pool, but very different adaptation strategies. And then I think what has been already mentioned, the ability of forest ecosystems to recover and to respond to shocks. That's a picture of the Bavarian forest, a nearby Šumava forest at the Czech-German border in southeastern Germany, Western Czech Republic, where we go with our students every year. And what you can see here is the relict of an old forest that has been died due to a bark beetle predation in a strictly protected area. But 20 years, 30 years later, the forest is massively regrowing without any human intervention. So the system itself has a strong ability to regrow even after disturbances that for the local population look very ugly because most of the trees of the old trees have been dying. Again, this has been created by a long history of evolution, of knowing how to deal with disturbances. If you now put these 3 points together, there's quite exciting research on the relationship between diversity in a forest ecosystem and productivity, efficiency, if you want to say, of the use of natural resources and resilience. This is like the main finding, the quite easy main finding of a big review paper published in Nature some years ago, where the authors conclude that on average, a 10% loss of tree species biodiversity leads to a 3% loss in productivity. This is a bit simplifying, as many things in my talk are simplifying, but the basic relationship has been confirmed on and again, that diversity is positively correlated to resilience, is positively related also to productivity in forest ecosystems. My last aspect on the ecosystem side of the system is collaboration. For me, that's one of the most interesting research areas on forest ecosystems currently, the collaboration between very different species in a forest ecosystem. This is a mycorrhiza mushroom next to a European beech tree, I believe. And what you can see here is that they are closely connected to each other with the fine roots of the tree. The mushroom is getting sugar from the photosynthesis process of the tree, and at the same time, it's delivering water and nutrients to the tree. But the collaboration goes far beyond that. This is a Nature paper that had the nice title of the Wood Wide Web, I think already more than 20 years ago, and it's connected to research by Susan Simard from Vancouver and others that looks into the interactions that are created by this mycorrhiza network between different trees. So trees do not only collaborate with the mushrooms, they also exchange nutrients across longer distances through the mushroom network, and they do this in special ways. For instance, mother trees, old trees, give nutrients specifically to their children. There is collaboration, there's information between trees about disturbances, and there's a lot of controversy and debate in the sciences researching on these interactions. For me, this is really fascinating coming from a social science perspective because it's humanizing a bit the ecosystem and the interrelations in the ecosystems. I would like to show two books I've read recently that are criticized and discussed a lot in the community, in the forest research community. But to me, we are here in a boundary between the idea of competition in the ecosystem and collaboration, which is also insightful, I think, for your conference. I think I have only 4 minutes over, although I make it a bit shorter. What's now about the human factor in the forest ecosystem? Well, the most prominent, let's say, theoretical connection between humans and forest is a bit a dark one, the so-called forest transition curve, that works as a theory of change, but also as a theory of place. And basically, the idea is that with development, the forest area is decreasing due to use for agriculture and infrastructure. And then, with ongoing development and a more healthy society, in the end, forests are coming back. I said it works over time, but it also works over space. Here you see different world regions put in a perspective, and the interesting correlation is basically that with human development, you have this exploitative relationship with forest, and then a coming back relationship where forest area is increasing again. If you connect that to how human add to attitudes or management paradigms on forest, you here start with what you could see is a bit an old growth forest with not much visible human interference. And then you have a mixture of perspectives on forest management that are ranging from exploitation, from just using forest without thinking about what is going to happen afterwards, to very fine-grained shifting cultivation uses of forest ecosystems that had happened in between. And then there is, since about 200, 300 years, a lot of discussion about sustainable management in the forest sector. And if you want to make it really short, because the time is really short, there's basically a gradient between the idea to rationalize the system in the sense that you can see on the old map above, where early foresters have divided the forest in 100 plots of a similar size with the basic idea we cut every year one of them. So we have an enduring system of sustainability in the sense of wood production, up to much more complex systems that you can see below, also with long tradition, a planterwald forest, this time in the Black Forest in Germany, where farmers have, over centuries, developed a selective cutting system that creates a lot of diversity at the level of tree species, but also of structures, and with that implicitly uses the advantages of diversity and resilience in a forest ecosystem and combines it with the interest of the farmers in having large dimension trees for construction and small dimension trees of different species for fuel wood in their supply. I skipped that slide in the interest of time. What it would have said is that basically these different ideas of how humans relate to forest exist in parallel, and that they are connected to different worldviews and interests, and that there's also a lot of tension between human beliefs and attitudes towards forest and conflicts. That's what I'm very much interested in my research. I guess many of you have a close relationship to agriculture. You can think about similarities there. I come to my 2 minutes on lessons for managing knowledge ecosystem. Now comes, of course, the big step from all these nice things about trees and insects and humans and their attitudes towards forest to the main topic of your conference. I have 4 lessons. I think one lesson could be, if you look at the evolution of forest ecosystems, to nurture evolution of a knowledge ecosystem, to develop a network of niche specialists, knowledge specialists, but also generalists, probably to bridge amongst them, to most efficiently manage the complexity of knowledge. So the analogy is the complexity of natural resources in space and the complexity of knowledge. To maintain also a certain diversity, paradigm diversity within that system, to increase options for learning, via learning, and responses to shock. So to me, there's an analogy between the diversity of knowing and the diversity of species, biodiversity, and resilience. Thirdly, it might be key to manage productive interrelations, and for me, this discussion and ongoing debate that has a very strong societal aspect about the role of competition vis-a-vis the role of what you can say niche collaboration in the ecosystem and learning from each other and sharing resources is extremely relevant also for knowledge systems, not only for ecosystems. And finally, just to remind us all, it is nice to look into analogies, but often there are also differences between trees and people, even though the latest research on humanized forests, making these boundaries more and more blurry. Keep it in mind, and I guess other speakers will be needed to explain the human factor better than I can do this. I would like to close with showing not a diversity of species, but a diversity of people. That is our group in Wageningen, where we try to be very diverse and very resilient and to work on forest ecosystems and to understand the human interrelations connected to them. Thank you very much. It says 0.
Thank you very much, Georg. Thank you very much. And we go right to the next speaker. She has her own Wikipedia page, so you can look things up there, but she's a former Minister for Agriculture in the Netherlands and a UN Assistant Secretary General who is working with and in charge of the SUN, the Scaling Up Nutrition project that she coordinates, which is work with 65 governments around the world in order to defeat malnutrition. Gerda Verburg, it's our pleasure to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And Mr. Winkel, you said you're out of your comfort zone, so am I. And I'm happy to be out of my comfort zone because I'm learning today. The day we don't learn anymore, we need to get retired. Because this morning I'm learning about trains. I did miss the remark on the trains when introducing me. I learned about the ecosystem and the collaboration between trees amongst themselves and with other parts of the ecosystem. And I will learn about bees. So I'm excited, etc. But I would like to, first of all, congratulate the organizers of this event, because it's a brave step. The first time that different entities are working together to rethink a system and to bring things together from a scientific perspective. It's not only science, but I will come to this. One life, one planet, one society, and many opportunities, many ways, as it is scripted in the narrative for today. And that's true, because in the end, we're all one ecosystem, and there are many opportunities leading from where you are, leading from where I am, to contribute to this. Let me first take a step back, because indeed I'm the coordinator of the Scaling Up Nutrition movement. That was a movement that was started 12 years ago. After a report of the Lancet Commission, they had sorted out and they told world society, leaders will never be able to end hunger and malnutrition for two reasons. One, preventing hunger and malnutrition is a matter of political will. So if politicians don't want to take the lead, if a government is not accountable or a community council is not accountable, you will never succeed. Secondly, you're all working too siloed. Civil society is doing this, business is doing something else, the United Nations is having another approach, and also donors and investors are investing in projects and programs with a beginning and an end, and what about the structural change? So this was the moment when the different stakeholders came together and were asking country governments to sign up, no entrance fee, no membership fee, but to sign up to be accountable, to invest in preventing hunger and malnutrition, because this is an investment in human prosperity, but it's also an investment in socio-economic development, and it's an investment in maintaining and nurturing the planet, because good food and nutrition from the very beginning is not only nourishing the body, starting with children during their first 1,000 days, it also supports the development of the cognitive abilities and the cognitive potential. So together, it will support a resilient, strong, healthy people who are smarter. Children are doing better at school, are more productive, and in many countries, if children are well nourished, later on they will be able to escape poverty and create families and support communities that are more resilient and have more opportunities for the future. So that was when the Sun movement was started, and if you are looking around today, you ask yourself, how successful have you been so far? Well, you can give the answer. It's never done, because bringing the players together, making them work together, or nudging them to work together, it's never done. And one war like now, or one disease like COVID has faded away a lot of progress, because all the different parts are working on each other. So there are a lot of risks and there are a lot of potential shocks, and that's not different compared to when it comes to One Health. For instance, antimicrobial resistance, like COVID, like bird flu that is everywhere, like monkeypox. And are we at the end of shocks? I don't think so, either for people or animals, or for both, or when it comes to plants. So One Health, just like ending or preventing hunger and malnutrition, requires ownership. It requires ownership at the highest level, ladies and gentlemen. It's a multi-sectoral approach, just like One Health is a multi-sectoral approach. It's not only the Minister of Health, it's not only the Minister of Environment, not only the Minister of Agriculture or Forestry, it needs to be all of them, and for that reason you need to have a government ownership and accountability. And for that reason, and that is what we are observing in many countries, it is important that departments, ministers, are ready to work together, that they like to work together. But what is necessary to work together? Well, you need to feel comfortable to work together, of course, but it also needs to be part of your key performance indicators. A Minister of Trade was telling me, Madam, I would love to work together, but my KPIs are to trade as much as possible. So when I look at food, I look at metric tons, and I would be proud if our country could be a net exporter of wheat, rice, and what have you, because that is what I'm held to account for. So it's also thinking in the system, how can we make sure that, that ministers and governments are working together. And then, of course, they also need to work together between their departments, and they are responsible to also encourage and reward their civil servants to reach out and lead on collaboration and to celebrate joint actions. So what I want to say here, that it's an all-of-government approach, not only One Health, not only food and nutrition security, but in fact it is part and parcel of the Sustainable Development Goals. We used to say that without healthy and well-nourished people, you will not be able to accomplish the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Today, I add to this, you will not be able to create the right ecosystem for One Health that is sustainable and durable, that is leaving no one behind, without that you will not reach this without investing in all Sustainable Development Goals. And last week, the Secretary General of the UN had a speech on the current crisis, and he said, in fact, what country governments do, focusing on their GDP and focusing only on the term in office, they should change their growth of the domestic product into investing in the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And they should be held to account by the voters, by society, when the elections are there. And please think with me, when did you ever see that people were going out in the street or making the importance of One Health, or the importance of food and nutrition, or the importance of education a topic in the elections? So there is work ahead also for us as voters in our own countries and maybe in our own community. What it requires, collaboration, is incentives, but also, let's say, packages. So incentives on collaboration and sanctions if you, or disappointment if you don't do it. And if you look at the ecosystem in the forest, that is happening. If you're not part of the ecosystem, you will be isolated and you will be more and more on your own. And that is the direction. When we look at what is happening right now, and it's still happening also in One Health, or in the different parts of One Health, everyone has his or her own comfort zone, his or her mandate, and there needs to be a trigger or an invite to step out of this comfort zone, to step out this mandate. And if we talk and discuss about what needs to happen, very often we say, but to make it possible, the government needs to do this, Businesses need to do that. Institutions need to do research. Very often we first say, but we first need to research, otherwise we don't know what to do. I don't think so. Because deep down, all of us, we know that the current way of acting in the One Health approach, in the different parts, is not future-oriented, will not serve society and the planet and the ecosystem to the extent that is needed. So we all know it. Let us start from our own leadership. And then, of course, you can create the question about research. What can science and research do? First of all, build the agenda. For what challenge, for what problem, for what future do you want to set up the research or the science? So think about the potential outcomes and make sure that you all agree on this. What is the clear objective? And then get the data right. The Sun Movement indeed is working with 65 countries, and the biggest complaint is twofold. One, support us in capacity building. Secondly, support us in building up a data system. A few years ago, there was the motto, data is the new oil, or data is the new gold. I think so. But data is also responsible for a lot of confusion, just like oil these days. So that is what I would like to say about an important role of science, and there will be more. What is important in fostering collaboration is to create win-wins. Create win-wins. And the same needs to happen in the One Health. Don't think that you need to be scared of big business. Yes, there is a lot of business interest, but there are also many civil society organizations that can counterbalance the power of big business. And big business, the representatives of pharmaceutical and food and beverage companies and other companies that you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, need to be invited to be a participant at the table. And when you're sitting at the table, you're equal, because most of the time, all of you drink a cup of coffee or a glass of water. Then start the conversation. Start the conversation, overcome language difference. Very often in the beginning of the Sun Movement, business people said, we don't have time to think, tell us what we can do and what we need to do, and then we do it. No, this is not the way forward. They also need to rethink their contribution, and they need to be able to adapt and digest and discuss the mistrust that is very often there against bigger companies. And they need to rethink their focus on profit, because as we speak right now, the capitalistic business case is very often serve your clients, serve your investors, and focus on as much as possible profit. The future for companies need to be serve clients, of course, serve your investors, because businesses need to make profit, otherwise they will not be there anymore tomorrow, but also serve your workforce. And with having a lack of a workforce in many countries right now, employers are becoming more and more aware, but this is not only the position, the situation in the labor market, it is investing in workforce, it's also investing in society, and it's investing in the planet. And if you rethink this whole business case, then you think that a company is really changing the way of operating and serving all the groups that are in the business case. However, that's not always simple, because also CEOs and boards are living in a tense and dense ecosystem. Let me give the example of Unilever and maybe Danone, where the sustainability and serving the people and focusing on good health and nutrition was really part of the business case, but their shareholders and stakeholders and investors said, uh-oh, wait a little bit less people, a little bit more profit, please. So you can also have course corrections. So change requires leadership, it requires vision, it requires determination, it requires a clear narrative and a genuine motivation. If you're only doing it for the wrong reasons, you will not succeed because you will be tested, you will be stress tested, you will be tackled. So you also need to be a stoic optimist who believes in his or her or in their mission. And you really want to be a part of the solution. And each of you, when thinking, and please do so somewhere today, tomorrow, or when you're traveling home or wherever you are, think about how you can lead from where you are to be part of the solution and to start a solution, because the part of the motto is not only one life, one society, one planet, it's also many opportunities. You have an opportunity to be part of this change. And then be comfortable to step out of your comfort zone, because, of course, you don't know where you end up. But there is always the opportunity to learn. And if you're not the only one who is stepping out of his or her comfort zone, you will be amongst people. And you, instead of looking on at your screen, your cell phone screen, you might look around. You might observe people and find new connections. I would like to address one more thing today, because there is a lot talk about safety. From my perspective, food safety is not good enough anymore. We're talking about food safety already for decades, and look what's happening. The current food system is bankrupting our health system. And over 80% of all diseases are food and nutrition or lifestyle related. So the role of One Health is not only to ensure safety, the role of One Health and the ambition of One Health should be do good, contribute in a positive way, create opportunity, health, prosperity, leaving no one behind. This does require a lot of everyone. It also requires to decrease a little bit the strength of legal issues. I know EFSA has a lot of legal issues, but I would say invest more in collaboration and trying to find solutions and trying to be around the table and to work together. And this is the new motto. Either you collaborate or you will become irrelevant wherever you are. You might think that you are a member of those few organizations or people who will survive, or families or communities, etc. It's not the case, because an ecosystem implies that you're all together, and that some may be harmed more than others and impacted more than others. That is true. But only if you are collaborating and want to be part of the solution, you will be able to contribute to the good. All right, finally, I would like to make a few suggestions and tips on how to get there and how to get the systems approach. Because it starts with leadership, it starts with doing different things differently, it starts with creating success and celebrating success, because success, even though it's low-hanging fruit, is the best foundation for wanting to work together and to create more success. To get together, yeah. Yeah, very good, very good.
Secretary General, but interrupt, I must, if I can ask you to come to an end.
Yeah, it's good. All right, few final tips and remarks. If you start to talk and sit around the table, find an independent moderator who has no agenda. That's important, who can be trusted by everyone. Invite every stakeholder around the table. Don't underestimate it, because it's more different stakeholders than you might think. invite people to not only take off their hat, their coat, and whatever they want to take off, but also invite them to leave their egos and logos at the door. Because a genuine dialogue requires that people are there to listen and talk without egos and logos. And then, if you find solutions, agree on the solutions, find the right track to the political economy, and make sure that it will be institutionalized, also into the funding for research and science. Finally, systemic change, One Health, food and nutrition security is about you, and me. Take a decision on at which side you want to be of history, whether you would like to leave your children a bank account and 2 houses, or whether you would have a legacy of really investing in the future of our beautiful planet, of our beautiful society, making sure from your part that no one is left behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gerda. And you talked about data being the new oil. In EFSA, we like to say data is the new soil, because it has a more sustainable connotation, and also you need to put nutrition in to get beautiful things out of it. And it leads, of course, to the soil to society that we heard about yesterday, rather than farm to fork. Next up, Noa Simon Delso. Really, when I read your CV, it's proof that the university ecosystem in Europe is well functioning. I think we share a DVM, and then you went on to, from Spain, you have a DVM, and then you went on to get also degrees from Belgium and Wageningen University. And now you're scientific director for BeLife,
yes.
talking about the importance also of stakeholder engagement in the ecosystem. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much also for the invitation. I would like to echo Gerda in congratulating the organizers, because it's already very nice to see the collaboration within the institutions to achieve an outcome. I'm actually going to follow I'm going to say that what Gerda has said at the end as tips, we have done them all. I'm going to present you the European Bee Partnership. It is a successful multi-stakeholder activity that we are carrying in the stakeholders in collaboration with EFSA and many other institutions. And sincerely, we implemented each and every single tips that Gerda just said. But I think it was important to, it is important to say that bees are really a very good topic to approach One Health, okay? Because as you can see here, bees are on the middle. So we have talked about human health. Yesterday and today, we have talked about diet, about nutrition, about safety. I would say health is much more than that. Health is much more than what we eat. It's also our culture. It's also the way we are as a society. And we have a lot of connections with bees and pollinators, much more than what we think. It is also about the dressing, the way what we dress, like cotton, flax, and everything. It is also related to bees. The houses that we live in, they are also related to bees and pollinators. So they are very, very inherent in our human health. Bees, let's say, as you know, we have the honeybees, those honey lovers. Honeybees are not just an animal, let's say, an environmental animal or a pollinator. We also use it as a livestock, of course, because we produce food from it. So then, therefore, we also need from time to time veterinary products that like to treat these animals. But we also have an interaction with animal health and plant health. So we have products like veterinary products, biocides, pesticides that can, in a way, we want to protect animal health and plant health, but of course, we also have some collaterals sometimes, and our pollinators can be impacted by them. And then that's the way we get to the environment, no? And the environmental pollution and the loss of habitat, they impact the bees, the pollinators, and that's the way we close the cycle. So that's why I say bees, when we work with bees and with pollinators, inherently we are having this One Health approach into our minds. We are having this holistic approach. Without it, we cannot understand what is going on. And that actually tells you that you need to work with a lot of people if you want to do something, okay? So you need to work with environmental NGOs, you need to work with beekeepers, veterinarians, farmers, with pest control industry, of course, pharmaceutical industry, veterinary industry, pesticide industry. We need to work with institutions and authorities, that's the must. And we also need to work, as Gerda said, with the processors and with consumers, naturally. And if anyone there has some other people that you think that should be in the list, please come and tell me, because most likely I forgot someone. So what we try to do in the European Bee Partnership, we try to bring all these people together. And so the European Bee Partnership is a stakeholder group that is sharing data for bee health, no, bee-related data. We're starting as a constat, let's say, I mean, there is no one can avoid it. There is a decline in pollinators. It's happening everywhere in the world. And then we also realize that all the people around the table need some data or information for our decision making. Either field practitioners, authorities for risk assessment and decision making, veterinarians, anyone, scientists, of course. We all need data. We are all producing data, but we don't have access to the data of the others, even though we would profit from it. So that's the reason why we launched in 2017 this European Bee Partnership. You can find there the terms of reference. And the objective of the people around the table was to bring all this data together. So yesterday we talked about data sharing, monitoring, trust, and all that. We are doing all this, let's say. So we are sharing data, bringing data together, building up a structure in which we can share safely, let's say, all this data. And of course, we standardize, we process it, and we can communicate we transform actually this data into information that people can use for decision making. That's a little bit our first steps. So we started in 2017 at the European Bee Week. We have a scientific symposium organized by EFSA and stakeholders, and that was kind of the paving event, let's say, of this whole exercise. The following year, we achieved our terms of reference that established the way we were going to work. And then in 2019, we even got the Ombudsman, so EFSA got the Ombudsman Award for this interaction and engagement with stakeholders. And that started our work together into creating something together. And what we are creating together is a platform, the European Bee Partnership Platform, that brings together all these that we have been mentioned about data sharing and interest, okay? So it was evident, let's say, that there was plenty of data out there produced by different people, different methods, different objectives and everything. And somehow, because we all have access to different data, we all have different opinions about what is going on. And the objective was actually to bring all this data together so we could start discussing on the same level, okay? So what we are doing into this European Bee Partnership, we are enhancing data collection to bring it all together, centralize it in a way, in a place that it is securely stored, well ordered, let's say, and it can be reachable in the future. Democratizing it, so anyone could have access to data that is produced, I don't know, Spanish that I can have access to data that is produced in Hungary or in Sweden or anywhere else. And and because this will be eventually an online tool where everything is accessible. This is a little bit how it looks. So we want it to be very accessible to users. So it will take the form of a map or different graphs and things like this. It is a one-stop shop. So anyone who's interested in pollinator-related data can go there and will be able to find their answers. We wanted, looking for this win-win solution that Gerda said, we want that this is served not just for the sake of keeping the data or putting the data together, but we want it to be the motor of a service for someone else who wants to develop some innovation based on that. So we are really kind of facilitating, or we think at least that we are facilitating innovation in the future. And it's a collaborative approach together and very, very customer oriented. So we are going to translate it into languages, include different terminologies, and so everybody talks on the same terms, etc. In each, and what is very, very important, that in each and every step, every strategic decision for the development of this platform, the members of the European Bee Partnership are there. So they are the ones that are deciding where we go with this platform, what is included, what is not included, which data can be integrated. They also help in reaching out to get more data into the platform. So we are creating a community, and we are creating all this together. Just a little bit of information about the steps, because of course in every innovation there are different developmental steps, let's say. We started a proof of concept thanks to a project, a European project, and after that, the prototyping phase and the operational platform, it is being supported by EFSA, okay? So I think EFSA there has been really, really fundamental for the development of this. It is also not just for the development of the platform, but also for the moderation of the platform. It is very, very important to get, as Gerda said, someone that is independent, let's say, and that puts all the stakeholders in the same level. EFSA, for that, has been also very, very supportive, and I think it is because of EFSA that we are now where we are. And with this, I would like to finalize with some comments, because, well, we have some years of experience. So in all this time, we learned that building collaboration between people who have completely different interests, different approaches, different realities, is very hard. It takes a lot of time, of resources, of social intelligence, and it is not done from one day to another. And I think we at the European Bee Partnership, we have established this on the basis of transparency, exchange, openness, and somehow the platform is a crystallization of this. So we want to be based on the same information in order to do decision making. And this, I mean, there is openness. If I don't agree with you, I just say it, and then we try to find a way forward, okay? It is not a problem to disagree. It is really not a problem. Then we just have to find a way to go to the second step. And I think it is very, very important to build it on respect. We need to respect the rhythm of work of the different stakeholders. In the group, we have people with a huge amount of resources. We have people, let's say institutions from very little resources. Of course, not everybody can invest themselves in the same way. And it is important to build trust, to have everybody on board. So we need to really respect, and if things will take a little longer, then it's fine, but at least we have everybody on board. Trust is very important. It is earned. It is not imposed, and we need to earn it. And I think because of this, it is very, very important to highlight some actions that impair trust. In this case, for instance, we work on transparency, we want on exchange. It's fine if we disagree, that's okay. But for instance, taking a public methodology that has regulatory implications and cherry pick just some parts that are interest to us, let's say, these from the others, it impairs trust. And I think this is happening, for instance, now in within some authorities, for instance. We see some methodologies pushed, for instance, by risk assessors that from risk managers' point of view, they are not really taken on board or they are not applied as they should. This, of course, impairs trust. Then each of us have a role to play. We all have different competencies in the role. So whenever some of us or some institutions take competencies and responsibilities that are not theirs to take, and this has regulatory implications, this also impairs trust. So each one in the room needs to take responsibility of what are their competencies and not leave others to be their punching ball for themselves. And then finally, not listening and, or taking into consideration the opinions that we don't like, it's really, really impairing trust. I am sick of participating to consultations, workshops, in which we go and we are invited to present our views. And every time we go and present the same views. Why? Just because we see that they were never taken into consideration. So then we just repeat the same story. At one point, as a stakeholder, you say, why am I here? Why am I even wasting my time into coming here and give my opinions when they are clearly not taken into consideration? This, I think, it's very, very important. If we want to collaborate and build trust and build a future in which everybody are integrated and have a say, we really need to listen and to take into consideration the opinions of everybody. And with this, I would like to finish, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Noa. And in fact, thank you to all three speakers for the policy, the forest, the stakeholder perspective, which I think was a very important inspiration for us to go into the next phase. And talking about inspiration, I'm somebody who sort of before he gives a talk, tries to get some inspiration from all sorts of places. And I usually listen to music when I do this. Motown, Marvin Gaye is the sort of music that I would like, and remixes. And I was doing that yesterday, and this song comes on, and there's a very deep voice in an American accent saying something that I thought was very fitting for today, was, it ain't what you got, it's what you do with it that counts. It ain't what you do, it's how you do it. And that's what we're about to discuss next, how to do it, with three more speakers. And in order to set that up and help me, I have my recently discovered older twin brother from Germany here, Mark Gramberger. I think I have to have a word with my father at some stage. What happened there? They say he is better looking and I'm more white. Mark?
We'll work on that.
We work on that, absolutely. No, but I've taken my glasses off in case you have difficulties to tell us apart.
And you have this
I'm the one without the glasses. And this one here. Okay, Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick Risch. And pleasure to be here with you. My name is Mark Gramberger. I'm from Prospects. And I'm going to guide you through the next part of our session here this morning. And in fact, we heard already quite a lot of interesting things about this idea of an ecosystem approach. And we'll get further into it with three different perspectives. Now, I'll just let you hang there a little bit about what those three perspectives are, because at this moment we'd like to activate you a little bit. Activate you and your brains and start to get into that collaboration part of what we're doing here as well. So we said, and Nick, you said that before as well, you underlined it, we'd like to give our online participants also this opportunity to participate, and those, of course, here in the room in Brussels with us in person. So both of you. So therefore, we're going to like to use a function, in fact, that allows us to do that. At the same time, we do operate here under quite severe restrictions in terms of logistic and in terms of digital. So I invite you, in fact, to make a showcase out of using an actually very basic function, the chat function. The chat function, that's going to be our means to communicate. And now I'd like to invite my colleague Katharina to tell us how do we do that, because sometimes you have to use the app, sometimes it goes directly if you're on the web. So how do we do that?
Yes, thank you, Mark. So when the people that are joining us online, you already made the first step because you can see us on your device, I'm pretty sure. But there is a chat function for you as well, which you can only access if you log in. So once you registered for the conference, you got login details. If you don't remember them, you can reset your password. Not a problem. It goes relatively quickly by getting an email, and then you can reset your password. But it's going to be important that you are logging in, because otherwise you're not going to be able to contribute to the chat, which would be a pity. For the people in the room here, it is similar, just that we would ask you to download the app if you've not done that. It's easy to find. If you go to your badge on the background, on the back, you can see how you can find it in the App Store and the Google Play Store. So you download the app there, and then also we ask you to log in with the credentials that you got. Again, if you forgot them, you can reset your password. Only if you're logged in, also on the app, you will be able to see the chat. So it's important, log in, please, and then you can communicate with us via the chat.
Okay, thank you very much, Katharina. Now you know how to do that. I mean, using a chat is easy, but getting there, you know, this is something you have to do specifically if you're working through the app. Now that you know what, in principle, you have to do, let's try it out. I have a very, very simple question for you, because in this quick media world that we live in, you hear a lot of buzzwords, things that, you know, that words that turn around a specific concept, like the ecosystem concept. So what kind of buzzwords, and just think about one, what comes to your mind, the one buzzword when you hear about ecosystem collaboration? Just put that one buzzword in, don't put 3 or 4, just one word, we start easy, and then please do that. You have a few moments to do so, because some of you might still be in the process of downloading and finding the session. If you're quick, fine, then you're done. But continue it, we'll keep it open for a couple of minutes until we then close and see what we have. Now, in the meantime, I promised you 3 different perspectives, quick perspectives on the issue of ecosystem collaboration. And the first perspective that we have is the digital perspective. And we have with us Paul Devalier from EFSA. Paul, please come to the stage and join us here. Paul is the enterprise architect at EFSA, so responsible for the digital transformation. And if I get it right, Paul, what you're also busy with is actually deconstructing organizations. Now we'll hear perhaps a little bit more about that. Paul, welcome to the stage. We also have with us Harald Gjein from Norway. He actually runs the Norway Scientific Committee on Food and the Environment, and also formerly Director General of the Norwegian Food and Safety Authority. Harald, the practical perspective, right into the matter. Please have a seat with us here. And our third perspective, research, ladies and gentlemen. And we have with us Sarah Hartley. Please come up, Sarah, and take the seat. You are working at the University of Exeter on science and governance, and that also on quite some demanding and perhaps sensitive issues like GMOs, genetically modified organisms. But let us start with you, Paul. Your executive director, Bernhard Url, was talking about this kind of seismic shift almost from collaborating once in a while if we have to, if there's an issue to solve, to something that where collaboration in an ecosystem becomes intrinsic, the normal thing to do. Now, from a digital perspective, what do you see there?
Yeah, thank you. This is working, yeah. I wanted to come back actually to that comment you're picking out about old-fashioned collaboration versus the potential of digital ecosystem that Bernhard mentioned yesterday in the opening. It's fundamental to understand that the digital era has eliminated arbitrage on information access. And it has huge implications for the business models we need to adapt to be successful and contribute to the success of others in a digital ecosystem. If you allow me to explain. Supply chain, the art of mastering supply chain was what the 20th century was about, and it was all about information access. It was about controlling rigidly your corporate identity through your supply chain by leveraging the information that you had access to. We used to call that customer intimacy or value add, because if you sold the milk to the consumer, you got 20 cents on the euro. If you milked the cow, you got 1 cent. And the value add was the idea that the more valuable you are, you're more valuable as you get to the consumer. In fact, it was about control using that information. If you were a public organization, you might have the resources and the power to collect information, but not the legal basis to share it, or sometimes even the willingness, the capabilities. So the digital era has gotten rid of that arbitrage in information access. And that has brought us to a different form of interacting with organisms in an ecosystem that is digital, but it is modeled on the natural ecosystems we learned about today in forest and bees.
So from control to something that is less
Fundamentally different.
Fundamentally different.
Yeah.
So not less controlled, but fundamentally different. Tell us more about that.
Well, we have to get much better at social influence. The elimination of the information access arbitrage has created a reduction in the power of the value of expertise. I know that's offensive to some, but the engagement on the social influence of the communities and the organisms, whether they're friend or they're foe, becomes the fundamental skill. And that operates at a corporate level. We have to be more social as organizations, even public institutions, but also inside as individuals, you and me, better at broadcasting. Lower, higher microphone. There.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
All right, we all want to hear what you have to say.
Well, in the forest, the frog is always croaking and the birds are always singing, and they're all listening. And that's something that in the 20th century, institutions and private organizations struggled with.
Right. Now, the question of, you said friend and foe, kind of that goes a little bit away. But if you're talking about food safety, you know, there are corporations that are interested in getting a stamp on what they're doing. So there's a conflict of interest. Is that still part of the ecosystem, those corporations? Do we still have to work with them if we're EFSA or if we're another player involved in this?
I don't really see a conflict of interest, but I do see three things that an organization has to rethink in their policies, in their organizational process, and in the people that make up an organization. The first is we must start looking across an ecosystem, which is friends and foes in your field, but also near fields, and understanding where value is being created. Because just like in a natural ecosystem, the lion, the gazelle, and the beetle are attracted to the water, a natural source of value for all, and we can't say that when the gazelle is eaten by the lion, they're in partnership, but the beetle and the gazelle are in some way, even though they are unaware of it. And we need to capture that awareness of who and where and how value is being created and moving to it. That's very uncomfortable for a logo, right? Which was mentioned a few times today, I thought.
So capturing this value, going away from this idea, I control the knowledge. How do you see that in the digital world? Can you give us a few examples?
We build the capability to assess and analyze where value is created, and we shift our policies and processes towards where the value is created.
So we shift from the inside to the
outside.
outside.
Yes.
Looking where value is created.
That's right.
It's very conceptual. Is there some examples you could give from the digital world where we could see this happening?
We see organizations, both public and private, practically engage with society, its citizens, through the chat, for example, consumers, but also with the foe, getting into discussions with those we would not traditionally partner with to understand together where the value is created and how we can exchange value together. We see much more of that than we did in the 20th century. It was a pure competitive model. We see that between Samsung and Apple, to quote the digital giants who led us there to this different way of thinking. Right?
But talking about perhaps the digital giants for just a second, you hear when you read a little bit about ecosystem approach in digital, big companies, Amazon, creating their ecosystem, and it sounds to me almost like they sit like a spider in the middle of it and control again. So that does seem to be a difference of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it seems contradiction, but this brings me to the second thing I think organizations need to do, which is we all want to build it. We want to build our information stores, our corporate processes, our supply chain, our websites, whatever capability we have. In reality, let's take another famous example that we all know, an Apple or a Google. You know? It looked like they built a supply chain. Really, they offered value into the ecosystem, and value attracts more value. And so what we need to do as organizations is stop building our own kit, our own applications, our own process. Offer value to the ecosystem, and you will find that others are attracted to it. That's where we need to let them contribute, whether they're friend or foe. Because the more contribution is, the more that platform, that lake, that body of water attracts others.
Paul,
If we find that ours is not attractive, as MySpace, another example from the digital world, then we need to contribute our value to someone else's platform, which means we need to change our corporate governance and policies to allow our employees, our staff, our partners to work to contribute value to that platform which is attracting the ecosystem.
Right.
That's the second major change.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. And the idea that we have to now go out and find where and how we can contribute value and also take a bit of value of what we find out there. Very, very interesting.
But we saw that in Noah's presentation with the bee.
We definitely did.
life.
We definitely did.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. And Harald, let's move to you because you're coming right from the field. You're working in this area.
Yes.
Now, did you apply an ecosystem approach, a collaborative one? And if yes, where? Where could this happen?
Well, I think I should tell a little about who we are first, before we go into that question. Norwegian Scientific Committee of Food and Environment is a copy. We work like EFSA. And we started like EFSA with food safety. From 2015, also the environmental perspective come into our scientific committee. We are independent and we give advice, we give risk assessments and other assessments for both the Norwegian Food Authority and for the Environmental Agency. And that's the key situation I think we are in, as an answer on your question. We try to give advice and risk assessment where we can look more holistic, especially when we get commission from both these agencies. And of course, we also do food safety risk assessments for the food agency, food authority, and vice versa for the environmental. Yes.
And help us to understand what that means, like a holistic approach, as you're saying, practicing this. Could you elaborate a little bit? Where did you do this? How did it look like in implementation for risk assessment?
Yes, I think I can give a couple of examples. We had a report, a risk assessment of a new disease that come to Norway and to Europe, in fact, in 2016. It was CVD on reindeer, and there were a lot of different view on that challenge. It was zoonotic, it was also, we were asked to see, are we going to stamp out the whole wide reindeer population in Norway and so on. And then we have to have a holistic view on this. And I think one main thing here is we had around, in the same panel, we had then experts both from the environment and from the animal health and from the human health, sitting together to try to give this holistic risk assessment to the government. This was the base, the common knowledge base. I think this is also a key word here. Our task is to give a common knowledge base for both the authorities, but also for the ministries. So here we got then, as Gerda was pointed out, the government, the ministries have to look at this together. And I think this is a one step at a time. if you can give some examples like we did here, and like another risk assessment on wild boar, that much of the same problems. We had a new wild boar is not in Norway before. We got it, and all the problems with the human health, with the animal health, and invading new species. This is a part of one of these problems. So I think take one step at a time and show that this is possible to solve together.
Thank you very much. And indeed, later on, we'll hear a little bit more from you as well about when we do that, what do we come across, right? So it seems to work, but let's see, if there are not some steps on the way that we need to consider. But let me go to you, Sarah Hartley. And working on genetically modified organisms doesn't seem to be the easiest subject to address. And then we talk about risk assessment and there. But how do you practice a collaborative ecosystem approach on such a difficult topic?
Well, I think one of the ecosystems we haven't talked about, but it's the knowledge ecosystem, and I think that's complementary. It came up in all three talks. I think this idea, certainly in thinking about the slide that was overlooked slightly due to time, had that lovely list of the different types of knowledge that each of the actors brought to the knowledge ecosystem. And Noa's talk also talked about this value of collaboration in different types of knowledge, bringing it to bear around the table onto the problem of bees. So there's a knowledge ecosystem, but there are challenges in the knowledge ecosystem. So in an organization like EFSA, some knowledge counts as knowledge and some knowledge doesn't count as knowledge. And so the question of what knowledge counts and what knowledge gets included in decision making is a political decision, if you like.
Is it a scientific decision?
No, it's a political decision. It's a value-based decision. Political as in a small p, but it's a value-based decision about what knowledge counts, and that we don't have enough discussion about. So even thinking about data, what counts as data? We assume often it's quantitative data, and the increased role in modeling will see, I think, increased use of quantitative data.
Okay.
But there is qualitative data too. And just because we can't include data, some aspects of knowledge are not as easily quantifiable, often that means it's excluded. So there may be value-based decisions for excluding knowledge, but we may also exclude knowledge just because it's difficult to fit it in.
Okay.
And we don't have the methodological option to do that. So diversity is key in ecosystems, and diversity in knowledge is going to be key too.
Diversity of knowledge. So what does that do? That sounds like more complexity as well?
It is more complex, but it can work. So the example of the BeLife partnership was a great example of where knowledge, diversity can work. And we need more cases of that. We need more experimentation where we can bring diverse forms of knowledge to the table. But I want to caution that's not going to solve the problem, right? Because we already know, I think what GMO example shows us is that it's not just about knowledge. Right, so we saw on the panel yesterday, the plenary panel, this kind of, I think, an overall agreement on where we want to go with sustainable food production, sustainable agriculture, one health, one society, one food. But once you drill down into that, there's different ideas about what that means. May not all be on the same page. And the GMO crisis, I think, showed us the difference between more technological, favorable features and around food security. And then food sovereignty was a kind of conflicting narrative where GMOs didn't fit as easily. So we're going to have to, it's not just about knowledge, it's going to be about values as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And we're just tipping on topics here, which we hope we can go later on during our session in a little bit more detail. But thank you very much for your three statements. Now, I'm going to ask my colleague Katarina. So we asked the participants to come up with buzzwords. Now tell us the buzzwords they have come up with.
Thank you, Mark. And first of all, thank you all for contributing as well to the online participants. Yes, there came quite some words into through the chat. And maybe not surprisingly, the one that was most common is collaboration. But I also could detect something that Sarah was just highlighting, diversity, complexity. So these kind of aspects came back, as well as connections, exchange, interaction. So how different players are connected. And then there are some, let's say, points that came from individual contributions. Nevertheless, I think important to have a common goal, to make it sustainable, to be an inspiration or to have inspiration, creating synergies, and having motivation to do so, and the respect for each other. So a lot of things that came back there from the audience, so thank you again. And I'm curious to hear what you make of that.
Yeah, thank you very much. So many different words, from respect, what you mentioned last, to collaboration, which is quite obvious. Which of those are linked to what you would have come up with your one word? Sarah, what would link?
Well, I think diversity would have been one.
Diversity would be the one for you?
Connect with, yes, definitely. I think we know that from science, that diversity is, think about biodiversity, so diversity in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of values, I think.
Thank you very much, Harald. What would be
I think common goal.
Common goal?
Yes, you have to have a common goal. If you don't have that, nothing happens.
And that's also what in your practice must have come back, because you bridge those different domains. Without a common goal, you're going all over the place.
And when you sort of reach the common goal, you have to also have the knowledge base that give the trust for the different both stakeholders and authorities, and of course the public. Yes.
Thank you very much, Paul. What would be your pick from what you heard? What links to what you have come up with? Would have come up with?
I think they are all good words. I would add evolution, because I think it is about adapting to a different environment and taking stock, taking consciousness of society in that new discourse. I liken to your comments and one in the chat about the relationship between agenda and then conclusion, and I think there's a very real evolution of those over the years. It's no surprise that food chain and supply chain were both buzzwords in the 20th century, and that we're looking at a more collaborative model for society. But we also saw in the forest example, or in some of the buzzwords, that we do want to have a different and more inclusive form of collaboration, especially in knowledge, I agree.
Well, thank you very much, and also for your quick reactions. Now, again, you will stay with us, and you will comment further on what we'll discuss later on, so please stay with us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to you for a second time, and we have a very specific question to you that you see on the screen right now. And again, please use the chat function as you did before. And what we're now looking for is a little bit more elaborate than one word. You can use several words, imagine, but we'd like to ask you to keep it to perhaps just one contribution. How can the collaborative ecosystem approach contribute to the goals of the One Health idea? So how can it do that? Think about like a headline, a couple of words, don't write long sentences, because that's going to make it very difficult to further process this. But think about how then could, the collaborative ecosystem approach contribute to the goals of the One Health idea. So this is your moment to put it in the chat so we can see later on what you came up with and discuss it here in the broader panel after the break. So this actually gets us to the break. To get a couple of refreshments, get our mind cleared again. We got a lot of interesting ideas here through this first part of the session. Before you do that, don't forget to put your point in the chat. How can the collaborative ecosystem approach contribute to the goals of the One Health idea? And you still have a few moments, and then we'll cut. But after that, the break. So we'll get a break for everybody here to come back at 11. A little bit later is still okay, but at 11:05 we will continue. So this is for our in-person participants here in the room. So 11, end of break, 11:05 we will start, so please be back in time. Our online participants, you have a little bit more of a break. So you will be back with us at 11:20. So you get a little bit more of a possibility to get your coffee or your tea or orange juice or whatever you'd like to have, and then come back fully refreshed when we discuss what you have said and much more after the break. Thank you very much. See you back in just a few moments. Thank you. So get ready for the next steps. And here we welcome again our online participants as well. You had a longer break. We were already starting to discuss here a little bit in Brussels with everybody who could be here in person. Obviously, dear onliners, we also value your opinions and your ideas. And in fact, what we'd like to ask you is to do exactly what you did before the break, namely use the chat function to answer 2 more questions, one after the other. I'll introduce the first question to you in just a second. So this is the moment to take out your smartphone if you're here in Brussels, or use the chat function when you are listening to us and collaborating, hopefully, a little bit with us in just a second online. So the first question, chat is open for your answer. What do you see as challenges for realizing a collaborative ecosystem approach? So putting that into action, what challenges do you see? What are the challenges? If you could restrict yourself to 2, that would be great, because our colleagues in the back, they have the work to go through all that, but do make it a good choice of 1 or 2 challenges that you see for realizing a collaborative ecosystem approach. Your ideas about that individually, put it in the chat, please. Now as the chat is open, we'll give you a moment, 1 minute or 2, to put it in. So keep your sentence short. Ideally, think of like a title on a news site, or if you still read a paper, newspaper. So like more of a title, not the whole article, because that makes it difficult for us to actually go through that in time to get out what you really wanted to say, the essence. That's what we'll focus on. So another minute or so to put this in. Question, what do you see as a challenge or as challenges for realizing this collaborative ecosystem approach that we have been talking about? It's just another moment. And then we'll close the chat. Things are still coming in. Very good. You're active. Okay. Excellent. I still see a lot of typing here in the room. Focus on the small device in front of you and typing in. Some people are ready, great. You can already relax, get ready for the next question. And those of you who are still typing, still give them a couple of seconds to finish. Okay, so we'll give it another 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Click send, please. Thank you very much. The second question we'd like you to answer. Now there are challenges and there are things we might be able to do about it. And maybe we can get the slide up for that one as well. So the question that we now would like to ask you is not anymore what you see as challenges. That's question number 2. It's the next slide, please. Thank you. What actions, then, could we take to tackle those challenges? You just identified the challenges. What actions could we do? Could we take to do something about them so the challenges ideally are overcome, or at least dealt with? Again, restrict yourself to perhaps 2. If you only have 1, no problem. Put it into the chat. You see, you haven't used the chat that much for a while, have you? Right? So this is really, we're doing something here to alleviate the function of the chat. Anyway, what actions could we take to tackle these challenges? What could we do? Keep it to one-liner if you can. What could we then do? Maybe not so easy. Maybe it's clear for you what needs to be done. 1 or 2 of those actions. So also online, take a good thought, but don't think too long because you still have to type it. And we'll give you another minute to type what we could do to tackle those challenges. right, still typing? Still thinking? Let's give it another half a minute to finish the thought, finish those actions that you think we need to take to tackle the challenges. Okay, we're getting close to finish that exercise. Everybody here. And I'll give you the countdown from 10 in just a second or two. And here we go. Also, onliners, we know that you're a little bit delayed in terms of what you hear from us. A couple of seconds later, you hear us. So we're closing in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So please push the send button so we know what you've been typing. Don't forget that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those of you online, for those of you here in the room to go through this and identify these points. We will actually now start to see what you've come up with. Remember, there was a first question before the break. We'll start with that, and later on, until my colleagues had the time here to work on this in the back office and see what we brought together, then we'll hear about the other two questions. But we have here our speakers and our interviewees from the first parts of the session. Thank you very much for still being with us and not having run away. We're very happy to have you here again. And Katharina, now comes your moment to tell us about this very first question that we asked and talking about those contributions that we perhaps could see from an ecosystem approach.
Yes, thank you very much. So when we asked before the break, you all took a well-deserved coffee break, we asked you what this collaboration could bring and how does it look like. So first of all, it is important to start listening and involving the different stakeholders, minorities, and listen to the different ideas and thoughts. Also important to start with is to move from data collection to data connection. And all of that in order to maximize synergies and avoid duplication of efforts, and to develop a common and holistic knowledge. To do all of that, it's important to take different perspectives into account to address and simplify complexity. It is important to identify patterns and mechanisms for One Health, and to address cultural values and raise awareness of the context and the surroundings that we all obviously are faced with. And really last, but definitely not least, it's important not to forget that it's about building trust.
Building trust. Thank you very much, Katharina, for putting together what our participants have actually written in the chat. So this is now that you are hearing this here in the panel. This is live, so we didn't know beforehand what you would be coming up with. So there are many things that people said. Now, I pick out one, Paul, that must be music to your ears. From data collection to data connection. What do you think about that benefit? Is that a contribution for ecosystem services?
I definitely think it is, and it I think maps to this idea of looking for where value is being created, instead of building your own databases, collecting your own data for your own purpose.
Closer to, yeah.
For your own purpose, yeah.
Okay.
Because if we're just capturing data and not sharing it, not connecting to others' data, then I think we are disserving the environment and public health.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, how do you see it from your perspective in terms of the science and the data connection? Because you were also talking about different kinds of knowledge we need to bring together. How about the connection of data? This is one of the points of the participants.
Can I speak about another point?
Can you speak about?
Can I speak about another point?
Another point?
Another point that came up from the feedback.
Okay, but we're going to come back as well
right,
to the data one.
I'm going to pass on then to somebody who might want to speak about the data. I think Noa, you had
anyone
something
about
to
the data? So this is, yeah, please.
Noa.
Can I speak just with this micro? Hello?
No, it doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, so in order to have this, I'm fully into this data connectivity. I think it's the only way to make sense about all the data that is produced from different places. But in order to do that, somehow we need to change the rules that are creating this data production. And then if there are any laws or any regulations creating data, somehow they also, the law also need to foresee the data to be publicly available in a usable form. So not just for those who created the data, but also for others who are going to take this data and have to make sense of it. And this is nowadays the big problem that we are finding, actually, that different people collect for different purposes data, and there is no connection. People do not think that this data can serve to something else. So we don't build on each other's efforts. And that's actually what we want to solve somehow with the platform we are doing. But it is very, very important that there are pieces of legislation that oblige those who are collecting the data to somehow, and mainly if the data is collected for public purposes or with public resources, to be out there in the public open space. Of course, respecting the publication that everybody has to do, because I mean there are some of the people producing this data that live from the publication, of course, of the analysis of this data, but eventually, earlier, better than later, this data needs to be out there into the public and need to be communicated to the public. Ideally at European level, because of course that would mean that, for instance, official data, it's harmonized. So we don't have, for instance, 28 different ways of collecting public data that is obliged by a regulation, for instance.
Okay, thank you very much making this point about the rules. Gerda, you want to comment?
Yeah, then I only want to add one little thing, because the people around the table or the people who want to work together, they need to trust the data. Where are they coming from, and are they reliable? Are they usable? Can we use them? And I think then I'm very much in favor of the more connectivity, the better it is.
Okay, the trust of the data, that the different kinds of data you get together from different sources. Harald, do you have something to share there in terms of how this could look in practice? And I'm also coming back to Paul on this point.
So I think the problem for us and I think also for EFSA is to collect the data from all the different sources. If you don't manage that, and if you don't trust the sources where you have them from, as Gerda says, you can connect the data, and you can't use the data to make to shape that trust. That's important. Thank you.
Thank you. And just very quickly, Paul, and from an EFSA point of practice perspective on this connecting the data rather than sharing that.
Connecting data rather than collecting data has been a major part of our strategic effort for some years now. Okay. And we are working with the Commission and other agencies in order to bring together to create a space where data can be connected. And that is something we will be committed to over the following years.
Okay. No, thank you. Georg, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, as I said, I'm out of my comfort zone, not being an expert in food safety, but coming back to the forest world, there's an interesting controversy about data in the EU and Europe on forest, that some of, especially the forest-rich countries, they don't want to give their forest data to EU institutions because they see this as their commodity. They would like to manage and not want to disclose data on biodiversity, but also on wood. So there's an interesting connection between, let's say, political power and data. And I found it fascinating in the bee example to see that there were mechanisms that transparency is there to overcome that. And I was wondering how you deal with that in EFSA, this aspect of, well, data sharing also means not being a data person, harmonization of data, that again, a standard might have effects on how data is presented. Is it easy for you to just collect the data, or are there challenges also related to that already? In the forest world, there definitely are. So more a question than a comment, actually.
Yeah, a question. So how easy is it? You have ownership issues coming in, perhaps.
It's for you.
Yeah, slightly aside. I think that there are ways to deal with data that you can't trust, right? And what we have is a skills gap and a trust gap between I'll say a traditional scientist, there are many different fields, and a data scientist who can advise and work together to work with both clean data, official data, open data, public data, private data, property as data, and the many other different forms. So there are ways to solve the problem in the digital era, I think, but we don't trust those methods traditionally.
Question of methods and trust in methods.
No, I just wanted to say the trust in the data is, of course, key. And in our exercise of the platform, we have one person only checking data quality, a data scientist only checking the data quality, analyzing it to check if the data is valid, is not valid, if maybe there have been data collecting errors. But of course, the person that analyzes this is a data scientist, but it's a data scientist that have knowledge on the field. Because if a data scientist coming from another field takes this and they would say, yeah, that looks nice, but maybe it doesn't make sense. So data quality check, it's a key step in order to get trust.
So we have to become good at that. It needs to be a focus of what we're doing, not an afterthought. It needs to be also something that is linked to expertise in this field.
It's expertise and it's built within. So you need to build it within.
Within.
Yeah.
You can't put that somewhere else. Sarah, you wanted to comment.
If you allow me to say two more things about the data and the reliability of data. The connectivity is crucial. Trusted data are also crucial to have a baseline and agree upon a baseline if you are to agree on making progress into a certain. If countries or other sources do not want to share, you have also instruments to put a little bit nice pressure on them. You start with naming and faming those sources who have shared their data. And then you ask questions, hey, this source or this country hasn't shared. Is it a mistake? Should we sort it out, etc.? And then as a next step, if you agree on it, you start with naming and blaming and say all participants have shared their data, they're all reliable, but there are 2-3 sources who haven't shared. A pity. Let's make sure that they also want to share. So it's building up the instruments from naming to faming, first the positive, always first the positive, and then if you think it's appropriate, then you can also do the naming and shaming.
Yeah, and we have seen these processes also in the environmental field, right, with biodiversity, climate change, where it takes a couple of conferences of parties to get somewhere, but it can happen with perhaps also a little bit of shaming involved. Sarah, finally to you, your other pick.
So I'm just going to talk about a possible solution. So we know that the choice of data in risk assessment is controversial. Glyphosate is one of the more recent examples in deciding which science studies are used in risk assessment. But guidance documents, I think all the agencies use guidance documents to describe or to lay out the kinds of data requirements that are required in future risk assessments. So the guidance document is a place where we could have much more engagement and collaboration in deciding and laying out, if you like, it's like the cookbook, if you like, of data. So we could use those guidance documents to specify what kinds of data are needed, the breadth of data that's needed, and that should be, those are value-based political decisions, so that should be open to a much broader range of engagement than just experts.
Thank you, and indeed we're going to get into possible solutions also later on during our discussion with more input from you as participants. I also heard in what we saw coming in from the participants, maximize synergies, avoid duplication of efforts, some kind of very instrumental points here. Is that something that you see as a possibility? That can we deliver this with an ecosystem approach? Well, I see you nodding.
Yes, I think for the first, a collaborative ecosystem is a fundamental if we should reach the one goal, the one health we have. And then the meeting places, then we can create in doing this collaborative ecosystem is very important, because there we will get inspired, there we will learn, there we can learn. The risk assessors can meet the risk managers and inspire them to do the right commissions. And also, one thing is important here. What is the research gap? What do we need to reach this goal? To inspire, to see, to get the holistic view. And I think research gap is a very important thing here. What do we need for, what kind of research do we need in front of us? Thank you.
How is that resource gap, just one question, how is that resource gap showing actually in Norway?
When we do the risk assessments, then we of course see what gap is it. We see that we don't have enough data. We don't have enough knowledge. We saw that now, the last report we gave was of fish diet, eating fish, the benefits and the risk of eating fish on the Norwegian diet. And we see we didn't know enough about dioxins. We didn't know enough about the nutrition, positive effects, and so on. So this is data we lack and we need more of.
Okay, thank you.
They inspire the research, and then the risk assessors can say to the research that give them the research foundation and so on, this is important if we shall reach the common goal, the One Health.
Okay, thank you very much. Gerda, you want to
Two things on data. The first question is, what do we know? What do we have available? And then, is there a gap? And do we agree that we need to fill that gap in data? Because then you operate from a coherent perspective. When it comes to duplication, for me, it is broader, and it's also the experience of the Sun movement that aligning different stakeholders like civil society, private sector, donors and investors, but also UN organizations, you need to do more because very often they have mandates that are alike. Let me give the example now of Ukraine. A donor country can only give its budget for humanitarian support once. So what do you prioritize to support the Ukrainian migrants and refugees? Or do you continue to support fully Yemen? So how do you and how do the different organizations, the civil society organizations, how do they compete amongst each other to get the funding? So there is something to dig deeper and to really go through this anxiety, if you want, to find a nomination or to find a foundation on which you can work together and filter out duplication and make even better use of the funding that is there, because then you are collaborative and you are additional instead of duplicating each other and in the end being each other's competitors.
So this combination of competition but then collaboration. Georg?
I think here we are at a key point, the combination of competition and collaboration and ecosystem, which is also like driving the evolution process and which is then can be tricky for an organization, especially I think the competition element. I think what has been showing there as benefits of a collaborative ecosystem services. I'm talking about ecosystem service because we worked in a project on ecosystem service together, Mark, on ecosystems, is exactly this diversifying the perspective, filling the data gap, because you collaborate with someone who has the data, who is the specialist. I think these are the easy things, the gains, but then the duplication is the tricky thing. And then what I could imagine is that in such an ecosystem, you either strive then for niching in with complementarities, but there might also be cases of real duplication, and this is then something where it might become very tricky to collaborate, or then what is the niche for the different partners in the ecosystem then? I think this is the most tricky part for managing it, I guess.
So it is, as you said, it seems to be about managing that competition, collaboration at the same time, which, Paul, I understood from you, that's new, that we're seeing this now, and this is becoming a key skill for organizations. Can we say that?
I did want to bring it back to skill, because the resource question, I think, is an interesting one. I believe we have more computational power today than we are using. And we have more resource in terms of funding than we are adequately using, as you said. There's a fair amount of research on complicated problems versus complex problems. And in complicated problems, given enough time and enough resource, we collect the data, we do our sense-making as experts, and we produce a conclusion. When problems are complex, the cause and effect is not obvious until after the fact. And so there are a different skill set and a different approach is needed. to say, if I find myself saying I don't have enough data, I need more time, you likely will never have enough time, and you likely will never have enough data. So what you need to do is just start probing the environment, connecting data, looking at even flawed data or asking questions rather than trying to find the cause and effect, which will generate data around which you can iterate until after the fact you can draw some conclusions and go back into another set of problem solving. But we're not equipped with the right skill set for managing that complexity.
So it sounds like we're also moving not just into complexity, but also into uncertainty, because not knowing certain elements, right? Exactly. Now,
And getting comfort and uncertainty is the challenge.
And our comfort zone about addressing that as institutions who have not been necessarily made to deal with that kind of a setting. And this actually is where we can hear perhaps from Katerina something about those challenges that participants identified. We have started to go there naturally from all those things we could perhaps expect from an ecosystem services approach. But what are the challenges and what could we do about them? What do the participants say?
Yes, indeed. Thank you again for contributing in the chat. We try to really synergize of what has been put forward because there were a lot of mentionings and a lot of quotes. I think to start with, one of the challenges is difference. So not only do we experience differences between member states, but we also experience different interests of actors all across the board, and a plurality of values. Then people have indicated that one of the challenges is that we need to make a shift in the mentality. So we need to rethink, we need to see if there are existing silos, maybe bureaucratic silos that we have to get rid of. And then one of the major challenges is the missing trust, which is linked to participants not being comfortable sharing different views to maybe the views of the mainstream. Looking at possible solutions to not just those, but in general, we do see that we collectively need to be willing to compromise. So it's not only our interest first, it is finding a compromise. We need to establish common values, visions, and goals, sharing cross-disciplinary knowledge, and involve all stakeholders, maybe even in co-creating knowledge or in co-creating modeling systems. And last but not least, it is important to develop the skills amongst all of us to bring people together and do active listening.
Thank you very much, Katerina. This is quite a list that we got from our participants. Thank you very much for that input, and we'll see what we do with that list. So the first point that I heard, difference. So we have to be able to deal with difference. Now, how did that come back in your practice? Difference of opinion, difference of interest. We started to talk about a little bit of that. Is that for you an obstacle that you've seen in practice? Gerda says no. That's good.
No, that's the core business of collaboration.
Okay.
If you are all the same, you're maybe organize your own paddy train and you walk behind each other because you're all going into the right direction and have the same motivation. No, the complex thinking and the systemic thinking and the ecosystem thinking and collaboration is exactly to bring the different stakeholders, and don't forget one. Everyone needs to be at the table. And as Noa has said, it will take a while to get together, to feel comfortable next to those people you've never seen that you do not understand because they talk a different language. Because they are coming from the business, or they are coming from academia, or they are coming from the farmers' side. You sometimes do not understand each other, but there you need the leadership and the patience to build it and the time to invest in it, because it will pay back once the trust is there and once you have reached your first success together. The low-hanging fruit, and you celebrate. This is really duplicating the trust and the will to do more, because it tastes for more. If you are in a hurry and everything needs to be done in 3 weeks, because then the funding is over, or you need to have a solution, well, you might end up with not a solution or disagreement or even more friction and conflict because you're not listening to each other. You're even more eager to bring in your marvelous point of view.
Okay, so basically, ladies and gentlemen, if we listen carefully, it's becoming core business, that dealing with the difference. That's what you're saying. Georg?
Yeah, I find it very interesting always listening to you because you have this big overview as having been a minister, while I come from this academic silo where we are very siloed in disciplines, but we talk a lot about interdisciplinarity and working together. So it would be nice to learn more from you, to be honest. We will invite you to Wageningen at one point. And as you are a real Dutch, you will probably come, not like me, a fake one. That's very new in the Netherlands. Hey, but I wanted to say something else. I mean, this is at the core of where we are. That of course things are very complex, knowledge is complex, ecosystems are very complex, and of course to deal with this we have developed knowledge silos, we have developed disciplines, and now the question is how can we work together, and I always saw in the responses to the questions already many solutions.
Okay.
Perhaps it would be interesting to make a difference between the more rationalistic interest-based differences, also competencies, things like resources, fight about resources on one hand, and then the more cultural, emotional things like understanding each other, speaking different languages, and then to think about incentives to overcome both. I was thinking about your KPI factors that are perhaps more on the rationalistic side, but then it's also about speaking a common language or being able to understand and also to appreciate people that do not know that language. And I think thinking about a set of incentives more on the rationalistic financial side, like having resources for collaboration, incentivizing it, and then going more on the cultural, appreciating side, enjoying collaboration, listening to each other, even if you don't understand fully what the person is talking about. These are two different paths for me that are really important in increasing collaboration across silos.
And Georg, what you're talking there as well links very much to what participants have said in this shift in mentality, right?
From
Noa, that's what I heard a little bit also in what you've been presenting, a shift in mentality that is needed to be able to do so. It's not just enough to say, oh, let's collaborate, it's going to be good, but you need a different mentality. Noa, how do you see that, and how do we get there to that different mentality?
Well, the first thing I would like to say that for me, difference is a richness. And complexity is fun. And I think this is something that we need to embrace it, because only that we will be able to make sense of us. We are complicated as a society, and it's okay. I mean, that's what we are. And I mean, doing what the exercise we are doing, I understand very well the advantages of standardization, believe me, in terms of the data that you get and everything. But then the standardization gets to a level, and then from there you get much more from differences and from understanding these differences than from actually trying to be too simplistic.
So
yeah.
really the richness of diversity,
Yes.
of difference that we have in a situation, like Paul mentioned before, where it's complex, where it's uncertain, we get all that information and it helps us further.
Yes.
Right? Now, this shift in mentality, you mentioned that, Georg, the point of enjoying, right, is not only incentivizing and, say, making it more attractive to collaborate, which is important, as you said, but also enjoying that. Sarah, I was just thinking, GMOs, how to make people enjoy cooperating on GMOs, on genetically modified organisms.
Well, so I think the difference point is a really important one. Differences is diversity, right? So I think it's a richness. I would definitely agree with Noah on that. One of the challenges, I think, when we look back on what's happened in the GMO debate is it's a deciding of what counts as important in the debate. And so it's not just collaboration, isn't just about bringing people into the room, but it's about deciding what's on the agenda for collaboration. And so part of the problem with the GMO debate was narrowing it down to science, saying we can only talk about the science of GMOs. And all these other value-based decisions or socioeconomic decisions were being either made implicitly or just excluded from the conversation. And that excluded sets of people. So that difference became institutionalized in the way that the conversation was narrowed. So if you're going to have collaboration, there needs to be some debate early on about what you're allowed to talk about. You need that even the terms of the debate. And we know this from knowledge co-production rights. If you're going to co-produce knowledge, you need to have co-production in the terms of the debate itself and decide on what can be talked about and what can't.
So it's also there an active addressing the debate as in the collaboration as such, and not just thinking it's just going to happen. It needs to be thought through. It needs to be addressed as such.
So some of the critics of GMOs argued that the overall discourse around GMOs was around food security and not food sovereignty. And that fundamental difference created a kind of alienation which excluded the possibility for collaboration. So we need to think about the terms of those debates.
And from my experience, that's only one part of the agenda. But I think to get the GMO and the anti-GMO movement, the anti-GMO movement is already extremely diverse. So to get them in one room is already a courageous topic. And then you really need to take time, because it is possible. I think it is possible, because right now, all the people, they treat each other as an enemy. This is such a hard conversation that people don't listen to each other. They just shout to each other from their silos or from their, I don't know where they are all. So if there is an initiative to get everyone around the table, to organize around a table, you need to make sure that indeed all the different stakeholders are there, and that people who are coming there are not only bringing their opinions and their voice, but also their ears and their brains to think, and you can invite them to step into each other's shoes. Why not asking a legal representative of a GMO company stepping into the shoes of a civil society organization like that, and then come forward and then ask questions there. There are so many tools, but it starts with a will, and mentality doesn't shift in an overnight. Mentality shifts step by step, because it's inviting you to come out of your comfort zone, and you only are ready to get out of your comfort zone if you see that others are also coming out of their comfort zone. If you are the only one who is coming out of the comfort zone and you're the only one exposed, then you will be very, very quickly back in your own comfort zone, because then you don't take the risk, because you might be beheaded.
I hope, Georg, we put the others also outside the comfort zone, not just yourself. But taking up that point, time. We need time for this. It just doesn't happen overnight. Now, Harald, I can already imagine some people with a bit more of a skeptic idea about collaboration in ecosystems and all that, saying, what is the one thing we don't have in this quick world is time, and all this time to get people involved. And so, I mean, how do you see it in your practice? Because you're doing it. Is that something which stands in the way? It takes more time, more, getting on one point, agreeing, all that. Isn't that a hindrance?
I think it's important to see what is the time limit here, and can we use some time on what is important to solve now. So I noticed that difference and missing trust and compromise and bringing people together in active listening. That's point from the answers. I think that's very, very important. That's also our experience. Bring people in early in the dialogue, take one step at a time, and as we have heard before here today, make a win-win situation. Then we can see that we can maybe get that shift in mentality, that we know everybody that we have to solve these problems. Today we have a crisis on food security. Yes, it's getting worse and worse.
I'm not talking about safety, but security.
What are we doing
to get
with
in the
that
first place?
in food safety perspective?
Yeah.
It's just the same as they have on the energy. We have on the energy side. We have a lack of energy Shall we then use more coal? We have lack of food, so we then use more unsafe food? No. Then we have to sit us together, as Gerda said. We have to take one step at a time, but we have to find a solution now. And that is, I think, when we have crisis, it's easier to get that holistic view from everybody. But we have to learn some of these crises. Can we use that technique also in peace?
How could we use this crisis then that we have right now? Never waste a good crisis, right? To push the thing further. Any ideas you could share with us?
I think we learned a lot over the pandemic. It was very interesting in the northern part of Europe to see that northern Sweden, we chose two different ways to solve the pandemic. But the trust to the government, the trust to the experts was big, both in Sweden and Norway. In Norway, we listened to the Norwegian experts. In Sweden, they listened to the Swedish experts. And the solutions, they worked both sides. So I think trust is, as we have talked a lot about, is very, very important here. And then we have to have the communication. That's one word we haven't discussed so much. How do we communicate this risk assessment, this research data, and so on, to the public, yes, so we can get what the results we want. Thank you.
Can I give two examples of our own experience? COVID has learned many countries that their health system is not ready to take care of this sudden crisis of COVID, because it was overwhelming, people were dying, hospitals were not able, etc. In Sun Movement member countries, many of them developing countries, they didn't only have the challenge of the hospital, they also had the challenge of a lack of vaccination. And they were focusing in the emergency room, in the crisis room at government level, only on health. And they did a lockdown, etc. What they forgot is to invest also in food and nutrition and water security. And what do people do if they don't have a social protection then? They just go out of their house, because without income, they have no food, they cannot serve their family. And then they ask themselves, okay, what is worse, being killed by COVID or being killed by hunger, malnutrition, and a lack of water? So this is one example. The second example is on the food crisis right now. Many countries have been shocked by the fact that they are so dependent of food import. Egypt is importing up to 70% of all its food. The government needs to take a decision, and otherwise be enforced to take the decision, that they want to become less dependent on imports. So they need to think about their own food production system and the whole value chain situation. It is possible, so never spoil a good crisis. Also look at the opportunity and then gear up. Egypt is only an example. It's right now happening in many countries. Our people tell us we're looking for alternatives that are available in our country instead of wheat. We have the nutritious alternatives, but now we need to think of the next harvest. How can we make sure that farmers have the right starting material, the right fertilizers, etc., so that we can produce more ourselves. So the food systems is transitioning and needs to move forward after the crisis is rather sooner than later over.
Okay, thank you very much. Noa, I mean, just,
Yeah, I just wanted to say that for me, the crisis, now we have two big ones, but for instance, we had in the past an environmental crisis, what was the removal from the market from specific insecticides that were really all over the market. And then all of a sudden was like, oh my goodness, we are not going to be able to produce anymore. I think after every crisis, I'm a helpless, positive person, okay? So after every crisis, there is a possibility for innovation. We innovate whenever we have a problem in front of us. And actually keeping the status quo, you could mention, well, you could think, oh, maybe this is not really fostering innovation. So I think from the political point of view, we need to set up the framework so that actually this innovation goes into the right direction in the long run. And I think it's an opportunity. So I would go and grasp it, but for the good, for changing, making people less dependent. I still think that we get too dependent from others, from technology, from everything. And why not to make people independent, to actually give people the tool so they can actually go on their own to fix the problems that they have. This goes a lot through education, exchanges, and instead of, so there is this discussion also in terms of innovation, and I think it's very nice that Sarah was saying, like, everybody needs to participate in the problem framing, because we could even have a discussion about what is innovation and what is fashion, let's say. And I think even this discussion needs to be set up out there to all the stakeholders to give a thought and maybe to frame what is going to be the future. And to create empathy, because that's actually what we are talking about, to put ourselves in the shoes of others, to understand the problems of others and everything, and to understand the constraints that others experience from the activities of external people. Okay. And from this, for instance, the beekeepers, they know a lot, because they suffer the consequences of the actions of others.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you're addressing there. Now, thank you very much. Let's go further, Sarah, and perhaps Paul and Georg as well, about how could we use this crisis then to further our collaborative spirit, to build the ecosystem further, to make it actually deliver. What are your ideas?
Well, one of the things that we haven't really talked about here is like who's responsible for this. And so if we look at EFSA and the agencies, they have a scientific remit, and a lot of what we're talking about today, whether it's problem framing, One Health, this is beyond the scope of the scientific remit of the agencies. So it will require the Commission to be involved. It will require other actors, enablers, power holders. So this is not just an EFSA issue. EFSA plays a scientific role. So it's going to require a thought about who's responsible for leading this collaboration, who's responsible for funding it, who's responsible for setting the terms of the collaboration in terms of problem framing.
All right. So Paul, not to put you in too hot a seat, but these remits within which the agency is working, the players outside, changing that. Is there something in this situation now of crisis that we could use there as showing, well, we need to go a step further, we need to go away from the old silo thinking?
Well, I think everyone learned a lot from COVID crisis, and I would agree with you.
Could you hold it?
It's always an area for where innovation comes from crisis and from problems. But I want to repeat something Harald said as my answer to you. I'm not a physicist. I don't know the math, but I think that all we have is time. Space, though, is something that I can actually see. It's much more tangible. And so taking that first step into space, I think mathematically a physicist would agree that action is in space. Take the first step if you haven't done so. Take the second step if you've already taken the first. That's how we will emerge from crisis in any situation. And that's what we are trying to do, is what I can say.
Okay, thank you. Georg, any tip
on the
for
crisis?
The community, how to use it?
Yeah, well, I would answer a bit differently. To me, the crisis underlines the necessity to collaborate and to diversify the knowledge system. And I'm the forest guy here, so I take an example from forestry in my home country, Germany. Many farmers planted spruce plantations, pure spruce plantations in the 50s, 60s, 70s, because they were growing the fastest, they had the best expectations on the wood market. And they were, on one hand, very homogeneous, very productive, very effective. They could make a good living with it. But at the same time, when climate became warmer, when drought came in, when crisis came in, they were dying on large scales. While the mixed forests that grow perhaps, that had more challenges with the wood market, they persisted, the drought crisis and the bark beetle crisis. So what we can learn from that easy example for an organization is to look ahead and to anticipate also crisis in the diversity knowledge managing strategy, to be diversified, to not set everything on one horse. And then, of course, use crisis and keep the memory of crisis and the good lessons learned about collaboration and diversity also for the long times where there aren't crises. And I guess, of course, in the political science literature, we know that always, and in the practice, obviously, that crisis is the moment where policy can change, where the inertias, where the deep beliefs, you're challenged and you're ready to think about it for some time.
Okay, so yes, please.
I want to add one more thing on crisis, if we have time.
Yes.
Yeah. I participated in the first wave very actively of the whole dot-com boom. And one of the best lessons I learned from there is that there should not be a difference between crisis and stability, and how you react and how you evolve and how you take those steps. And I think COVID taught us that. We must not be thinking that we need to engage with our ecosystem in a different way when we're in crisis or we're in stability. And too often we're making plans during periods of stability. When the crisis comes, those plans don't help us, and we have to react in a different way. Then the crisis is over, we go back to making plans and policies. And that thinking has to change. We have to be more seeking value, listening, like we talked about earlier. So in crisis and in stability.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more, but where is the trigger? Because once there is, and it's said already by Noa, once there is no problem, we think there won't be a problem forever because we're happy with our life, we just continue like it is. And then a next crisis there, we say, oh, we didn't know that after COVID it could be even worse. We didn't think that it could be a war close to after the Second World War, etc. So this is also a mental thing. I agree in theory, but in practice you need to use the crisis to get something in motion that cannot be stopped again, but that is creating its own new dynamic. Knowing where you start, not knowing where you end, because innovations cannot be thought through. They have their own dynamics, etc. But this is I agree on paper, theoretically with you. I would like to add one thing that I've learned throughout my life. There was an African leader who said to me, well, you might think we are not moving fast enough. But as Africans, we have learned, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So maybe this is also a lesson here, that if we really want to have this ecosystem that is also balanced after you have gone through the whole change and development, and still is balanced, that it might take a little bit more time and determination and dedication, but it will go further and might be more part of the durable and sustainable solution.
Thank you very much. And Georg, I think in the forestry world, talking about the question of not dropping into the next crisis again with the plans made that are basically useless then. You're using a lot of foresight, you're using a lot of anticipation of what could come up in order to be better prepared, don't you?
Well, at least we think so in the forest world, that we can look 300 years ahead, and we plan in some forest systems you plan with 250 years of tree life, and then you think you know how to harvest them. But there's interesting research done at Wageningen, not with me, before I arrived, looking into this really deeper. And then, of course, you see that also forest managers, they were taken by surprise by the event, by crisis, and they have different ideas of how they make sense about the future. And I recall one PhD thesis where the outcome was, in the end, it's maximum 10 years. You blend in this long-term system, but still you're always taken by surprise. One thing I want to add to this interesting discussion, perhaps one way of managing crisis is also after the crisis, when the urgency is over, to really thoroughly look back and to understand the mechanism, what went wrong, what can we take from there as a lesson learned, and to abstract from that. I'm sure it's done anyhow in management science, but to do this thoroughly as an organization, I'm missing that partly in the forest world, where the crisis comes and then there's a lot of activism, you need to act, and then afterwards it goes on with the long-term plan until the next crisis comes. It would be interesting to do this thorough, when the crisis is over and there's a bit more time, look back, what can we learn? Is there a possibility to increase our flexibility and response mechanism? But I'm sure you're anyhow doing this. But for me, that could be an interesting
Let me add one step, because learning lessons is one thing, but then making sure that the lessons are applied in the next crisis is another step. Let me give the example of the high food prices in 28, 29. After this, there was a crisis response, the agriculture market information system, etc. As soon as this food system, this food crisis started, due to the war between Russia and Ukraine, nobody was asking, okay, what can AMIS learn us? But everybody was starting to be in a crisis mode, close borders, etc. The totally wrong reflection that people can do or governments can do, because it's making it worse. So it's learning lessons, but also make sure then that the crisis playbooks are there and are used in a next crisis. That's also important.
Excellent. Yes, Noa, please.
I don't want to talk about crisis.
Okay.
If we have finished with the crisis, I just would like to put another point
on the...
Yeah, okay. I would like to talk about fairness into this discussion. And one of the comments that Katerina did was to be ready to compromise. Yeah. In my experience, whenever there has been problems, controversies, okay, there is always the same winners and always the same losers in the situation. And this is very unfair. And of course, this is another thing that doesn't contribute very much to trust in the system. So I think, I feel, for instance, from the beekeeper point of view, I feel very unprotected from the system. Because, as I said before, we work with animals that are environmental animals. Something could happen to them that is completely out of our control, and we depend on the others to survive. If my neighbor does something, then maybe I can be harmed. And I have plenty of neighbors, so I depend on a lot of people. And somehow the framework, the functional framework that we have into our society doesn't really cover this. Whenever there is any problems of, health problems linked to pesticide application, for instance, like from applicants, so from the operators, this, it is well recognized, the insurance cover that, but the system does not cover that. The system is paying for this, so it is unfair. And I have been thinking how this can be rebalanced. And certainly, I don't have a solution. But I think it is important to put this on the table because we have a system that, in the way we have constructed, is clearly unfair. And somehow, I would like that together we could kind of discuss about it openly, honestly, and try to find a solution. Because this is something that people, like when you bring this to decision makers, they don't deal with it. Because first, it is difficult to deal with it. But at one point, we just need to solve it. Because otherwise, it will continue.
And bringing those points, this unfairness, as you're saying, these different perspectives that are not included on the table at all, gives the opportunity to address them in the first place.
Now, there is no need to start from scratch here. There is a movement in the food and nutrition systemic change that is called just transition. And I used to challenge them and say, it's not only the just transition, it's also the fair outcomes, the just outcomes, and not the trade-offs of a systemic change. Always there in food and nutrition, it's very often the producers, because they are having all the risks, etc. And it's not with the retailers or the big companies. So please learn from this movement if you want to have some lessons that you can apply on this, because this is also a systems approach.
And yes, and I would like to come back to an issue that was mentioned by the participants, and you also picked it up, the issue of how to do it then, a willingness to compromise. My question to you is that enough actually? Because compromise is meeting halfway, right? That's usually the easiest way. Might not be easy to do, but in comparison it's easier than others. You also talked about win-win, which is something completely very different. We go to a higher level. What do we need here? Is it both? Is it just one? Is compromise enough? What do you see?
It
Yes,
most
please.
of the time starts with consensus because it's impossible to get all of you, if you're coming from a different perspective, to give everyone 100%. I've learned in my life, if you get 60%, should be extremely happy. Then create a platform and say, next time I want to have 70%, 80%, and our ideal stays 100%, but maybe next steps.
Okay, so consensus first, yes, please.
Yes, I think it's important to have compromises because that makes results, and results is a main word here, because we don't get willingness from the ministries, from the different countries, from EFSA don't get positive willingness from the Commission and the member state if you don't show results. And
Right.
then to get results, you have to do some compromise.
Right. For results, that's needed. That's one way of looking at it.
Yes.
Indeed.
And celebrate, of course.
And celebrate when you get the results, like in a conference of parties. But not only there, because we're not
Yes.
talking necessarily on that level.
Because if your question was, is it necessary to do compromise to get these ecosystems to solve to get the One Health system to work? And then, yes, compromise is important in this chain, yes.
Thank you. I have a final question to our round, because we could continue talking about this until tonight and longer with more input from your side. But Sarah, you mentioned earlier the question of responsibilities on the one hand, but also I heard from Harald and many others also the question of it's linked, or all these things are linked. Safety is linked to security, is linked to many, many other things. Where to draw the line? If we're in practice and risk assessment, how can we draw lines? Do we have to think about the world system? Do we need the world model in order to be able to say something about food safety? How do we do that? Where do we draw the line on whom to involve and not to involve? What's your view? Yes? Yeah.
Well, to give it a start, I mean, this is why we all talk about silos and disciplines and differences, because exactly of that, because it's simply too much to handle for one. So what I would suggest to do is to collaboratively define the system boundary of the system we are dealing with, and to, following your advice and the advice of us, is to invite everyone that is sort of affected and relevant to discuss what is actually the system boundaries, and then to basically create a new system for the specific case, which then hopefully is not resulting in another silo, excluding some and the others. But I guess this is the way of doing it. So looking at a specific issue, define collaboratively the system boundary. I think you said also defining the problem. What are we talking about actually? What is the legitimate problem? Include the different perspectives on the GMO case. And then to give it a start within that system, connecting the existing systems. That was a very abstract answer, I believe.
Well, let's make it concrete, but actually collectively doing that, taking a perspective of a specific subject. Sarah?
So collaboration is going to be not just, we've sort of looking down at the moment between stakeholders or the experts, but actually it's looking up to between the relationship between the Commission and the agencies. One example I'll give you around this is on the public consultations on scientific opinions, where a lot of the public comments are not related to EFSA's work, but are related to the Commission's work. But EFSA doesn't pass those on to the Commission. So we could think about collaboration just in terms of sharing those roles and sharing the responsibilities for how we engage.
Mm-hmm. Sharing of the roles, Harald?
Yes, I agree. We can learn of each other, and everything is not being done in the same ecosystem. Difference, as you said, is also enrichment. So, yes, but we can collaborate and to show how can we use these results from these other researchers or opinions.
Going elsewhere, Paul, that was also your point, going elsewhere as well to learn in order to draw in?
Yeah, which I would say is making it more social. I mean, how to define the system boundary, how to define the risk assessment line, how far do you go? as far as a plural group agrees to go. So having that discourse. I'm reminded of your example about food security versus food sovereignty. Yeah?
Okay.
You kind of have to wrap it around both and include all in a very fair conversation.
Thank you. Noa?
I think it's important to separate the risk assessment and the risk management. And it's a little bit what Sarah was saying. Like, the risk assessment, I really think that the agencies at European level are doing great efforts into improving the risk assessment. But this is not all. Mm-hmm. And then the risk assessment is a theoretical exercise. And of course, we need to integrate there all the views if possible. But then we have to go to the real world and then see how far we were from the theory to the practice. And this is the risk management. And yeah, this is the part where also the collaboration and integration of views need to be taken into consideration. Right. Because this is a very, very important step. This is actually what makes what we find in the field, let's say. Yeah. And this somehow needs to be also integrated, and people there need to be open as well to access other views and other realities that may be inconvenient.
And that's where we are at the mandate line as well, where it is even more important to say so. Gerda, your 30 seconds last tip on how to manage those boundaries?
Yeah, I think, well, following this field remark, I think most real solutions grow bottom up. So it's like grass, like trees, etc. You cannot speed up solutions by pulling the grass. You need to give it time, etc. But then it's solid if it's well done. I don't expect solutions coming from top to the down. It's always about local people, communities. It's about creating ownership, not only a fair transition, but also fair outcomes that can stabilize and make people drive their own future together.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let me first say a big thank you to you as participants for having brought up these issues that we were allowed and able to discuss here, for having empowered us to do that. And let's also give a big hand to our panel here, reacting to all the points that you have been bringing up. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we're closing in towards the end of the session. Nikrish, we had a very interesting discussion. What's your first impression of what you've heard?
Well, I was very fascinated by all of the talks, and the one that sticks with me still most is to talk about the forest, because it had some points, and I try to sort of recall them here correctly. Georg will correct me if I'm wrong, but you need to find your optimal space. You need to optimize your space when you're there, because we all talk about time, trust, data, but in a forest, it seems to me to be successful. Yes, if you're small, you're small, you're big, make optimal use of the space. Then collaboration is within the system. And the one thing that I think really, as a concrete measure, I take away is that you need to offer first and accept later. Wherever you are, in whatever part of the ecosystem, why don't you offer first and accept later? Because we need to start it. It's us. And Gerda, what Gerda said about, don't wait for 100% data quality. Don't wait for 100% of the resources, because it will never happen. You need to do it, we need to do it with 60%, and we need to do it together. And it reminds me of one thing where the historian Yuval Harari said, why is human species the most successful animal species on Earth? Why are we so successful? Because we're the only species that can collaborate and cooperate in really large numbers flexibly. Bees, ants can collaborate and cooperate very well in large numbers, but they are very rigid in how they cooperate. We are flexible, we can adapt, and we need to adapt now.
Okay, flexibility. How about the flexible next steps to bring this ecosystems thinking further? what is planned? How are we going to see this going further?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. Look, we, EFSA, and our co-organizers, all the other agencies, we brought you together here, online and in the room, to discuss this. Why? Because it's in our roadmap. I would even call it a road book in EFSA, where we internally are already discussing what's the next step, how do we do it, and we're in the process of finalizing that. But we really invite everybody out there that wants to be part of that journey to also put it in the chat, because we are thousands of people. And we're not alone.
That's exactly, because you're talking about the chat, and big surprise, we're going to use it one more time, but this time it's super easy, and you don't really have to think much. And the question to you is, are you interested in being a continued part of that discussion and elaboration that EFSA will continue? And if the answer is yes, you just type in yes, because then EFSA knows whom to contact. If no, you don't have to type anything. If you're still thinking, think a little bit, you can still contact EFSA later. But now, if you think, I would like to be a continuous part of this dialogue to bring that ecosystem approach to life, then a yes is enough. And EFSA, what is it going to do with all that then? What are you going to do?
Well, look, I mean, our founding fathers had this idea that they put this hub into Parma, but it's a European hub. That's the same for the other agencies. We're not set up all in Brussels, 7,000 people, put it all in one. We are set up in a networking, in a hub capacity. We are nothing without our stakeholders, our member states. We're one actor. One actor that has already invited people in and that will continue to invite. We have the transparency regulation now. We talked about the data, where we need to and want to really bring out the data so it can be better scrutinized. So apart from the confidentiality aspects, that will be done. And we have a management board, a new management board that constitutes, officially in July, but for the first time coming together in October, hopefully, COVID allowing, where all the member states are a strong part of that team, so that they also have a vested interest to make that happen more. And we have high hopes that that will really set us off on a new journey where this ecosystem collaboration becomes part of the culture. I think it was Peter Drucker, philosopher also, that said, culture eats roadmaps, strategies, plans for breakfast. So it's getting it into the culture of all of us, of myself, to get yourself out of, to make that new collaboration, the new comfort zone.
Very good. And you got a lot of inspiration, and rest assured, that was also the idea by EFSA, is all the input that you've given in answering those 3 questions, even the buzzwords, that'll be looked at more intensely even after this session, and so that we can take it up in the next steps that EFSA can take afterwards. So wonderful. Now, Nick, you are going also to the final session, and before closing, can you give us a sneak preview of at least one of the things that you're going to take to the final session about what we have done today?
I think the necessity, because we have still talked at relatively high level, to get into concrete steps, and the necessity of us, that there is no alternative, that really from here there is no alternative, but that we are really positive because we are set up to do it. We are set up to do it. It talked about, when challenges, it talked about data. It didn't talk about people. When you were discussing, nobody talked about people being a problem of collaboration. And all these organizations exist through people, by people, and for the people. So this is the most important. Data we can solve. People we already have, and we will collaborate.
Very good. Time to close the session.
Yes, thank you very much, because we promised to be on time, and we have 1 more minute, or I do, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you, and thank you everybody, both in the room and online, to come to this session, to take part in this session. Maybe sometimes it appeared high level, maybe sometimes we got concrete, but it is to start something. We're already on our way, but to really push. I talked about this impetus, this level of energy that we're putting into the system in order to set us on our path. And this is one of the components of that, because it only depends on us, and it only depends on our willingness. So I thank you all. Please spread the word, go out there. The food safety ecosystem in Europe will work. Thank you.